We have a lot to cover, and unfortunately, not enough time to cover it in. You've probably heard this before. So let me introduce myself very briefly. I'm Tom Thresher. I'm pastor of Suquamish United Church of Christ, which is west of Seattle, across the pond there. Just so you know, I'm in my third career. My first career was as an economist, so both a Marxist and traditional economist. And so my interest in the economy goes deep and long. I was then a craftsman for a dozen years, and now I've been a pastor for 10 years. And I'm going to introduce you to a process that we have used at my church very effectively for 10 years now. And I'm going to introduce you to an aspect of it that can be used to, that can be used to deepen our capacity for doing social justice. And I'm going to walk through a brief introduction fairly quickly so I can give you a taste of the process. And the process we're going to just taste here, and hopefully some of you who are interested will join me later during the open space, and I'll get a chance to walk as many of you as would like through the process so you can get a deep flavor of it. Developed by Harvard psychologists Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy, and they have invited me to take this into churches because I think it has an applicability as, how should you say, a spiritual practice for progressives that doesn't carry any baggage with it. So it's a really different orientation. So we'll do that, go through it quickly, and then do more later. Alrighty. So just in terms of framing, you know this is almost cliche now. We're in a time of huge change, of great need. The income inequality in the United States now is greater than it was in the 1920s.
Down there.
And the frame I want to use here, oops, everybody's coming in now. Hello, come on in, sit down. This is for building a new economy, building a just world soul by soul. Everybody in the right place? Yep. Cool, okay, come on in. Okay. So there's a sociobiologist out, works with E.O. Welch. Her name is Rebecca Costa. Come on in.
Never mind.
Oh, you're not good.
Okay. She points to the increasing complexity of our world and makes the claim that civilizations do not collapse because of some crisis. They collapse because as their culture becomes increasingly complex, they reach a cognitive threshold where the complexity of the issues they face literally exceed the emotional and mental capacity of the people. Come on in.
Thanks.
Sorry, guys. No problem. There's a couple seats there, and if you need to grab seats, go ahead and do so. All
I'll
right.
stop taking two.
You guys are, I'll get young over here because this is going to be really relevant to your lives in a way it's not for us old folks. So I'm glad you're here.
Well, we can leave them a better world.
As a society reaches this cognitive threshold, two things start to happen. Hi, come on in. You may need to grab a chair.
Oh, there's one right here.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Two things begin to happen. Gridlock, the things we know we need to fix, we don't fix, we kick the can down the road, and beliefs, superstitions, start to take precedence over facts. Does this sound familiar at all? Okay. So the challenge is how to break through that cognitive threshold into greater mental and emotional complexity. Now, my argument is that churches have a role to play, and I say at the cutting edge of the evolution of consciousness, that we have a role to play that is unlike any other institution in our country. First of all, we have these gifts. We own the great stories, the great myths. And when I say myth, I mean a story that really holds our world together and gives us the pieces for constructing our own meaning making. The Christian story is the story of Western civilization, even if you grew up not Christian. Okay? So we own that. We own the story, and we are the ones who can modify it and change it. We get to change the context. The other thing, as churches, we're invited to change people's lives. We're invited to step in deeply with folks and make changes, and we have a time frame with no bottom line. Typically, we don't have a corporate board saying you have to meet certain profit point. Hi, all.
Hi.
Why don't you just grab chairs and scoot up? So anyway, we have something to offer. Many of you were probably at last year's, and Davida made the wonderful comment that we used to do things like community, and if you were born since 1985, you have 1,000 ways of doing that better than we know how to do it. What we have that nobody else has is what they call discernment. I would call it a capacity to investigate that inner space. That's the thing we have to offer. Okay. So, it's time for us to actually make use of this power. Too long we've been kind of an anchor on the evolution of our society. That effort requires sustained effort. If we're going to change the world, if we are going to create an economy that is more just, loving, and caring, and that's fair for people, it's going to be a really long-term process. So what I'm presenting here is the notion that along the way, we have enemies. And the greatest enemy is us. And typically, we are our own worst enemy because of the self-serving commitments that are hidden from us and the huge, big assumptions that we hold that we don't see because we look through them. And if we're actually going to make the kind of changes that will bring forth a different kind of economy, we have to deal with that level. So what is this one? Oh, okay. So my suggestion here is that we can combine our passion for justice with a contemporary spiritual practice to create a more just, caring, and sustainable world, again, at the leading edge of human consciousness. That, I believe, is the job of the church. So it's a new vision that's very old. Basically, it is, how do we open up? Hi, come on in. Grab a chair there. How do we open up and learn how to know differently in a way that allows the divine to work through us? We call it inquiry, in large part to kind of tap in with an ancient process called inquiry that's been around and around. We as progressives have done a splendid job of doing social justice, caring, coming to a very complex and expansive way of seeing the world. But one of the things we did is we kind of chucked the baby out with the bathwater when we moved away from tradition and a lot of the things that held the church. We jettisoned a lot of our spiritual practices, okay? We're called Democrats with prayer for a reason, right? Anyway, so inquiry is this process to go into those assumptions and to find a closer. So my model here is an iceberg. What we'd like to do is bring forth greater justice in the world. We in churches have theologies, worships, practices, and things like that, a community where we're working on this. But even below that, are invisible assumptions, beliefs, archetypes, if you will, and inquiry is aimed at that level. And that's where I'm inviting you into today as a taste of it. All right. Now, coming in through the door of social justice is really almost a stealth move, because the other thing I'm really offering you is a spiritual practice that can transform a community. We've used it for 10 years in my church, and it has created this deeply trusting community that feels safe and profoundly adventurous. I can say, shall we try this? And they'll go, yeah, let's go. Okay? Was that pretty close to true, George? Pretty close. Okay. So, here's a simple notion of it. It really comes from Paul. Well, the process doesn't, but it really frames it. What I will to do, that I do not practice, but what I hate, that I do. Does anybody relate to this? Oh, no, nobody relates to that. Okay. All righty.
Sounds like Paul.
It is. It sounds like Paul? Yes.
I didn't look. He proved it.
So here on one side, there's a heaven we hate. There's something we really actually want to, we really want to achieve. So the heaven we want is on one side. And yet there's a part of me, the hell I want to avoid, that keeps me from actually achieving this thing I want to do. The hell I want to avoid is grounded in a bunch of hidden assumptions. The heaven I want and the hell I want to avoid end up in this dynamic equilibrium where my ideals and dreams pull me this way, and the hidden assumptions that I hold about the world that I don't even know about, and the commitments to protect myself pull me another way, and I stay stuck. Or we as a whole community stay stuck. We'll move to one direction for a little bit, but then this other part acts up and it pulls us back another direction. Can you relate to this? Does this sound familiar? Okay. Your divinity is buried under there. God is speaking is buried under that big old rock. And what we're trying to do is create some space for that. All right, that's enough for a presentation. And what I'm going to invite you to do, I have my dear friend George from the congregations who's going to be my guinea pig. And given that we only have a short amount of time, typically to walk you through this map would be about 3.5 hours to really spend the time with it. What is it now? Do we have 30, 40 minutes left, maybe?
It's 5 till.
It's 5 till. How long do we have? Does anybody know?
3:40, I think.
3:40 or
Okay.
3:50.
Well, we will do this, or at least part of it, in record time. How's that?
Yeah.
So, George, why don't you come on up and bring a chair. See, George is just one of these people that's been a long-term guinea pig for me. Can I help you with that?
Yeah.
And I'm going to try the next to impossible. I'm going to try and type in his responses while we're doing this. Okay, so normally in this process, we'd spend some time together and say, okay, so what personally is a really important goal you would want to work with? Since we're orienting this towards, can we uncover the deep assumptions that we hold that will prevent us from going out and really creating a just world, creating an economy that works for all? How are we going to get at those assumptions that, for the most part, if our minds are working well and the way they should, we don't even know about it, okay? And that are likely to trip us up. So there are some wonderful examples here that we can work with. I may want to get out of debt. How many of you are all out of debt? All right. That's more than most groups. Congratulations, okay? Or one I had that was really good is I want to stop using my big bank credit cards because I want to stop supporting Bank of America. A friend of mine did this. He walked through it. This is a very wealthy man who can afford pretty much anything he wants. But he still uses these big bank credit cards, even though he says he wants to get rid of it. So we followed this process, and along the way he discovered that he uses those big bank credit cards because he wants the mileage. And he wants the mileage because if he didn't have the mileage, he assumes that he would never see his grandchildren. And if he didn't get to see his grandchildren, his life would be bereft. Well, it makes perfectly good sense then for him to use these credit cards in spite of the fact that he says, I don't want to use them. The great irony, but also the thing that is quite typical, is this man can buy all of the airline tickets he wants. He has absolutely no need of earning those miles. Yet it is a hidden assumption based on God knows what that keeps him locked in a pattern that he says he consciously doesn't want to do. Our process is about unearthing those, and then once we unearth them, there's a much longer process of how do we start shifting those so that we can make these deeper changes. So with George here, I want to walk through, and George, is there one of those
I'm attracted to work fewer hours.
work fewer hours? Okay, so George wants to work fewer hours. So the first question I want to ask George is, what do you do or not do instead? What is it that you do to keep you from working fewer hours as you say you'd like to do?
Well, I'm not as efficient in
Okay.
things I
So you're not efficient. What else?
do. I volunteer to do extra things. I have a need to stay busy.
Okay,
I don't
stay
like-
busy.
I don't like coming out
Okay, that's starting to move over to the next one, but that's okay.
Didn't hear that one.
He says he stays busy, he volunteers to do extra. Do you stop working when you'd like?
and no.
Okay. Okay, that's enough to work with. Does this sound familiar to anybody?
No.
Yeah. That we say we want to work fewer hours, yet we just don't stop working. Or, as I hear you saying, I may have stopped my paid work, but I'm going to go do volunteer work. So, first step. The next step to move into our hidden or competing commitments has two steps to it. So I want to ask George, let's pick one of these that really has a lot of traction for you.
Well, the thing about staying busy is appearing to stay busy.
Okay. So staying busy, or at least appearing to stay busy, right? Now, what I want you to consider is if you did the opposite, if you didn't stay busy or it didn't look like you were busy, is there any kind of anxiety that comes up for you if you did the opposite?
Yeah, I'd worry that there wouldn't be enough work.
Okay, so not enough. Or if you didn't look busy, what might happen?
People might stop. I'm not sure how to phrase this, but being busy leads to people asking for help.
Okay,
So I'm worried that people might not ask for help.
okay, great. People might not ask for help. No, that's That's as good as you're going to get on the computer. So folks might not ask for help, right? Okay, this makes sense, right? So if I don't look busy, then I'm concerned that people, what, they might think well, nobody really wants to hire him, all that stuff. So there's certain anxiety around that. Okay, that's enough to work with. Let's take with that one. And we go from the worry box, my anxiety of if I don't look busy enough, people won't want my services, to a competing commitment. There's usually a commitment under that. And when we are moving to that commitment, there's a criterion that's really important. It's called the yuck factor, okay? If I look at that and I go, oh, yuck, I don't really want people to know that about me, then we're on the right track, okay? If you're proud about it, if you're pleased about it, then that's not it. It's a noble commitment of some kind, okay? So, George, what kind of commitment, if we look and says, okay, people might not ask me for help, what's that commitment under that?
Whether the work I'm doing is worthwhile, am I worthwhile, can I help people?
Okay, so I'm committed to looking good for people? Or
Being worthwhile.
looking worthwhile? Or, okay. So I may be committed to looking worthwhile. What else? Anything else in there?
Well, you could expand worthwhile and helpful is a clearer synonym. Being helpful, being
Those are pretty noble.
committed.
Those are pretty noble. So
Those are,
if you look below, people might not ask for help. What might be a commitment under all that for you?
well, I'm worthless.
I'm committed to not looking worthless. Can anybody relate to this? I know I relate to it. I'm committed to not looking worthless. That's the flip side of looking worthwhile, of not looking worthless. And it's probably related more to the fear. So we've reached a really important place here. I'd love to take you all through this because usually at this point, and George is working with me, there's a profound settling when we get to this. Because we look at this and we say, okay, I'm committed to something that's really important and I don't want to look at it, but it tends to run my life. I am committed to not looking worthless. I think most of us hold that commitment. I certainly do. But here's something really important. I thought I could get it so that it would draw out, but I can't. When I hold this commitment to not looking worthless, then it makes absolutely perfect sense for me to volunteer to do extra work, to stay busy, and to just not stop working, right? Because if I don't do that, then I might look worthless, and it's in direct conflict here with working fewer hours. And I find myself stuck. Now, the way we can start to work with this to get out of it is to make the next step. See, I lost the heading too. The next step is to look at our big assumptions. And the way we step into that, George, if I were to ask you to say, George, finish this sentence. I assume, and I'm going to flip this on, I'm committed to not looking worthless. The flip side of that is, I assume that if I did look worthless, then ABC would happen. So I assume if I looked worthless, what might happen?
My friends, I would,
No friends,
wouldn't learn.
didn't learn.
Wouldn't be involved.
wouldn't be involved. What if you didn't have friends? If you weren't involved?
I wouldn't be liked.
Oh.
Okay, not liked. If you weren't liked. Huh?
You might begin to feel worthless.
You might begin to, I would feel worthless. You see where this is going, right? It starts to kind of spiral down fairly quickly.
And eventually I die under a bridge alone.
Die under a bridge alone.
You might not be alone.
There's a school on Bainbridge Island. It's called Bainbridge Graduate Institute. Maybe some of you have heard of it. It does an MBA in sustainable business. And I taught this there for years. And my students would all come and say, we all belong to Dying Under the Bridge Alone Club, because we've done this with Tom. So the point here is, those big assumptions tend to be very dire. And in a setting where we don't have George here in the fishbowl, I think so much. Very often we start walking down into those, and they become nonverbal. We get to a place where we can't even articulate them. Because very often these big assumptions that we're working from, we came to them when we were 2 or 3 years old. And they might have made good sense then, okay? If I didn't stay busy and my parents, I don't know, I have no idea what your background is, but I can imagine a situation that if I didn't look busy, my folks might slap me around and say, get busy. And I, as a young child, might go, oh, I better stay busy or it's dangerous. That's an assumption that would have been realistic at 2 years old given those kind of parents. Okay, I'm making this story up. As we grow up, that assumption no longer holds. But when our mind is working right, when our ego is doing the job it's supposed to do, it's protecting us from the pain of going there. So it's keeping it out of our conscious sight. Yet at the same time, that assumption is running us. Now, if we want to create an economy where we don't have to work all of the time just to make ends meet, if we want an economy that actually pays living wages, and we want to go out there and do something about it, one of the things we have to do is not trip ourselves up in the process by having this thing back there that says, if I'm going to be worthy and useful in the world, then I have to be working frantically all the time. Because that will undercut our very commitment to saying, no, I'm going to stand up at this point and work few hours. Everybody with me? Oh. Okay, the psychedelic part's on them. So what I'm offering and what I'm suggesting here is that one of the things that we as churches can do that nobody, no other institution that I know of can actually do is to take people and walk them into these deep places and hold the space where we can start to work with those big assumptions. One of the wonderful things, I know where you're going to go.
Oh man, it was great.
I know it. It's called electric. It's called electric sheep. You can just get it online. But one of the thing that we can do is we start to nudge those big assumptions. We use a variety of tools, like testing the big assumptions to see if they're true. One of the things we do in our church is take the work of Byron Katie. Are any of you familiar with the work of Byron Katie? A few. Because one of the wonderful things is you don't have to get rid of one of those big assumptions to make massive changes. You only have to nudge it. You only have to grow it up just a little bit to change it slightly. Just as if you change the foundation of a house, you could have a whole different house on top of it. And those subtle changes start to make changes in how we work in the world. And we can do this individually to check into where we are as individuals and the things that we might be doing to keep us from creating the kind of social justice we want. Or we can do it collectively as a community. I recently did this with the leadership in the church, collectively. I said, what do you guys want to achieve? He says, well, we want to get more folks into the church, but not just more folks. We really want to get folks in here who will engage with us because we really think we have something cool going on. We walked through this and we got to the big assumption, and the collective big assumption was that if we invite too many people in, they might change this culture that we love so much, and we might become a different church. So let's not really ask our friends, right? It's an absurd assumption because we have new people coming in all the time, and they're easily integrated into our community. But this collective big assumption that somehow our culture is fragile enough that we can't invite folks in puts the leadership of the community at odds with what they say they want to do. So the point is, we can do this work. We can do this work in a community in a way that nobody else can. We can invite people to look deeply that way, and then we can hang out long enough with each other in a trusting environment to do that work together. And in that way, we can really undergird, if you will, and support the more activist work of going out and changing our economy. So if I'm out on the lines and doing really hard work, I have a place that comes back to, and I can find out why I'm maybe not doing what I want and find that sustenance. So that's the idea of this work. Okay, questions or thoughts? I've talked a lot. Give me a second.
Do you offer this workshop in other churches?
Yeah, I'm just getting going and starting to offer this around because, as I say, we've been practicing it for 10 years and feel like, okay, this has worked really well for us. How do we take that now? And that's what the next step. George, yeah.
Do you find any of Keegan's writings helpful? Or?
Yeah, if any of you want to know about it, there's the book there is Immunity to Change, but they wrote a book 10 years ago called How the Way We Talk Can Change the Way We Work. It was much simpler. And I'm happy to talk to any of you about that. So,
How the way we talk can change the way we work.
yes, you got that. That was good.
By
Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy. They're Harvard psychologists. Wrote a great book called In Over Our Heads. Probably a lot of you read that probably in seminary.
What was the name of it again?
How the way we work, how the way we talk can change the way we work. So one of the things, if any of you would like to walk through this and walk into this with greater depth and have a deeper taste of it, we can do that during the open space. So if that's of interest to you, it'd be good if you'd let me know. I'd appreciate that. But we'll meet at the doors right outside the main hall, and then we'll sneak off, and we'll probably need an hour and a half to 2 hours. So if you're up for that at 9 o'clock, I'd love to walk you through that. So other thoughts or questions?
Can I bring my husband?
Of course, bring anyone you want. Bring everybody. We'll walk. You know, we can do this with 800 people at a time. It's not a problem.
I mean, if your big assumptions can lead you down a path that is going to possibly lead you into the place of therapy, if you really take it seriously.
Well, one of the reasons that we can do this in the church is anyone can opt out whenever they want. So unlike a therapist where if I were a therapist, I'd probably hold your toes to the fire and push you in a way. One of the things we do in the church is we just don't go there. Whenever you're ready to opt out of it, you just opt out of it. So in 10 years, I haven't had anyone have a breakdown that I know of. Though we've had some remarkable results. One woman in the church was trying to lose weight. It was a real huge health issue and had a lap band, but you know the lap band may or may not work with a lot of folks. She worked with this process and lost 250 pounds over the course of a year. One of the frustrating things with the process is that we've had a number of folks who have found a very deep level of empowerment through this process and then said, oh, that job I wanted to take in Europe and I was afraid to do for the last 10 years, now I'm going for it. See ya. And they leave. I mean, we've been successful, but it wasn't exactly the success we were looking for.
Well, I guess that was your big assumption, that everybody would stay.
It is my big assumption. This is so good, you gotta want to stick around. So,
Could you speak a little bit to how he's going to be better now that he recognizes his big assumption?
it's only a beginning. At this point, what we would do is in a group, well, we use various techniques to challenge that, to walk into it, and the idea is to just shift it. Now, George may be better off just by knowing that. And our metaphor is this, that when the big assumption is back here, I have no idea that it's running me. But if I can move it right here and just kind of keep it at least a little bit in my awareness, then, you know, I start to see it during the day and I go, oh man, I'm acting like that, and that's why. And if I can also go, oh gee, this thing over here happened where I wasn't really working hard, I was kind of just loafing, and people wanted to talk to me anyway. People still like me. Oh, that's a piece of counter evidence that I can bring in to challenge that. So these are the kind of practices that we do and support each other doing and often meet every week or two. And come back to that. And the nature of that is keeping it in awareness starts to shift it. That's the beauty of it. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, there's a question, yes.
I'm really intrigued by your statement early on in the role of the church. Your words were, we own society's great myths. Could you wander around in that a little bit?
Sure.
What are those myths that you think the church owns? And does this get us into that, for me, a dreadful place that, you know, there's no way to the Father except through me, Christ, and if you don't know me, you're going straight to hell.
Yeah, that wouldn't be any place I would go with this,
But you see why I'm asking the question, because, you know, there's a lot of, there's not a church truth out there.
And how do you know that's not a big assumption, was the question I had.
well, let me respond.
Yeah,
and
just in the great myths.
When I say myths, I hope I'm clear that I don't mean lies. I mean foundational stories.
Joseph Campbell type myth.
Yeah, Joseph Campbell type myths that say, here is the large cultural lens through which we understand our world. So when I say this, I'm saying that if, as Western civilization, we look to the stories that tell us how to act, of how to be forgiving, how to be generous, and all those are pretty much stories that come from Christianity. And the values that are embedded in those stories are typically the values of the West. And that you didn't have to be raised in a church to get those values. I wasn't raised in a church at all, and I got those values. And in fact, at one point when I thought I was having a heart attack, I was wondering about God as whether God was merciful and whether I was going to heaven or hell. And I suddenly realized, why? I don't believe in God. I never believed in any of this stuff. I've never been in a church in my life. And yet, the categories of my thought were those of Western Christianity. And I suggest that we're all embedded in those stories.
Our literature also has all of that in it. Our everything for Western civilization does come out of that. It's a whole different thing from the idea of being religious or believing in the faith, as opposed to that's what surrounds us. And
I say we own them because we're the place where those stories come from, and we're the ones that can legitimately reinterpret those stories to support more expansive consciousness. So in my church, we not only do kind of the progressive UCC interpretation, maybe the Jesus Seminar folks, we use a lot of Eastern theology woven in with it. We use science and physics. Brian Swim is an important piece of that, and you all may be doing that. But that's what I mean. We expand the story, and then when an individual says, how do I understand the world? They're embedded in very expansive stories that give pieces to pull from. Does that make sense? Does that make some sense?
What church are you?
Suquamish, UCC.
Suquamish.
Yeah. Go to our website, Suquamish UCC.
Nick Kroll's old church.
Huh? Nick Kroll's, yeah.
And who's the pastor there now?
he is.
You are.
I'm the pastor there. Been there almost 10 years.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Thank you.
So, I just want to make sure I'm really understanding this, Tom. It seems that you're using this on a corporate level within the church, where people could work together to look at assumptions everyone's making collectively within the church about issues that come up that might move toward this bigger vision of freedom from whatever it is that keeps us from accomplishing this economic justice that we want to accomplish. And you also use it on individual levels to help individuals within the church change.
Yes. And there really are two pieces of it that are important. You've emphasized that. So we could be the church gathering together here saying we want to move from a charity model of feeding people to a way of involving people in the process. Okay? We could do this, look at the collective assumptions we as a whole community hold. But then each of us will have a different set of personal assumptions. So it could be really a twofold thing. You might want to move from the charity model to make them move from giving them fish to becoming fishermen model, right? You may not be able to move there for an entirely different set of personal assumptions than Becky has. So both pieces. The thing that is really quite extraordinary on this is that not only do individuals make changes, but we've had probably a third of the congregation walk through this, and it creates a very different substructure for a culture. Because even in the little piece that I showed you here, you get a taste. When George so willingly walked into that set of competing commitments, we all know that place, right? We all know that place. We all know those hidden assumptions. And in that moment, there's a place of safety where we know about one another things that we didn't think we wanted to tell. Okay? And I know I'm a schmuck, and so are you. And there is just so much freedom in that. So much trust, so much joy. So as we've had folks walk through this process, it deepens, there's a deeper sense of safety and trusting and really playfulness that emerges in the church. It's not the direct point, but it's one of those side benefits that perhaps overwhelms even the direct point of doing it. So, yes?
The process of challenging assumptions.
Yes.
You get in, we come by Easter, we get that Jesus died for our sins, and there was a nice switch, and I think for a while there was, Jesus died because of our sins. because we got sucked in to following political powers rather than, and political powers had him as a pain in the butt, so they got rid of it.
Right.
It's because of our sins, not for our sins.
So that would be kind of the larger frame in which
No.
the larger frame gives permission to raise questions.
Right.
One of the other things we might do in a more specific context, like I may assume that I'm just not worth good enough. Okay, a lot of us confront that. I'm not good enough. That's a common assumption among all of us. Or I'm not lovable, or whatever it might be. And where we'll go with that is we'll actually start little tests of it. It might be that I feel like I'm not good enough to talk to that person over there, or to challenge my boss, or something like that, or to say no to my spouse, okay? Whatever it might be. And to create a very safe, modest test of that assumption. What if I said, instead of whenever my boss said, Tom, I want you to go do this now, I don't say no, that would be too big of a test. I might say, could I do it in 5 minutes, right? And that would be a test, that it's not safe enough or whatever, that I'm worthy enough to say, give me 5 minutes. I would take that little piece of evidence and I'd bring it back and I'd say, oh, well, gee, I was good enough, I was worthy enough that I could say that to my boss. That's a challenge to my big assumption, right? And I take that data in. And so a lot of it is a process of doing that. And we do it in a group because one of the things about a big assumption is when it's like a set of glasses, it filters out the things that don't confirm my big assumption. So if I have the assumption that I'm worthless or not good enough, then I see the world around me in terms of evidence that proves that. It's very hard to see the counter evidence, and that's where a community of friends makes such a big difference. Tom, notice this, over here you really were good enough. Like, oh no, shucks, that wasn't really. Yes, you were good enough. No, not really, not really. That whole thing where you got a community that says, come on, you need to listen to us. You need to pay attention to it, and that's very hard to bring in.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you don't hit these assumptions head on, you hit them from the side.
Yep.
And that's that safe and gentle way. Because they might be big, but they're also shy. You hit them.
Well, and what most folks want to do is I found this huge assumption. I'm going to take it on full blast, right? It's going to fail.
Right.
My test of it's going to fail, and what's going to happen? I'm going to confirm that it's actually true, right? So that's why we kind of nibble at it around the edges. Mm-hmm. We'll do role playing where we'll have the noble assumption, or the noble, our big commitment there, the heaven we want. Talk to the self-protective assumption and what good you're doing for me. So you had a question?
Yeah, no, what I was thinking, and I can't wait to get home now with some of this new material but it's the family, the smaller church that I was noticing where these assumptions can kind of help guide or get in the way. And a couple of weeks ago, my 15-year-old wanted to see the new 3D James Cameron Titanic with his friends. In the evening time slot, assumption that was a huge value violation for our family. We have never gone to a full-price movie. And now he's going to a full-price movie in 3D. It was $13.
Yeah.
And so that led to a great discussion about the economy, justice, how we spend family resources. And so tonight, Friday night, he wanted to go to another movie. And so last night at dinner table, my wife and our energy was way up. And we rarely say no, clearly. And we talked about our value. He knows the value in our assumption. He said, well, that's your assumption. And we made a presumption that it was his assumption too, because
That's great.
And so anyways, he texted his friends this morning, and after he calmed down, he's 15, and he said, why don't we do the first show on Saturday, which is like 3:50, and you get comfortable seats, like a 10 a.m. show. But anyways, and I wasn't sure whether I was proud of him for making that initiative, or if he would have pressed harder to say, I'm going to live my life the way, you know, but he did, and he was prophetic with his friends, and so I'm mostly really proud of him. But he still has to, he's only 15, he still has to come for me for the $13.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so it led to a lot of different ways how we deal with the economic justice. And we went to Penny's last night, him and I, because with their new model of caring for the customer, it was the first time I'd been to no coupons, no sales, and we really worked. He's going to a prom, he's a freshman going to the prom, and it's like, how do we react and interact with the economy in this new value that JCPenney's wants to live in the world? It was really impressive, and I'm going to follow up with a letter to the store on how that worked in terms of their pricing model, and how we don't go to full price shows. How do we deal in the world economy as a family? And that's where I see some real value as the work in both in our pastoral roles. Yeah, because it's everyday decisions.
And you're bringing up really important stuff. One of the reasons we have the economy that we have, having been an economist, I was one of the guys that helped design that myth, right? That keeps this thing in place. And that we help keep an unfair, unjust economy in place in large measure because we assume things that we don't even know we assume. We assume it has to be this way. There's a whole bunch of stuff, and that's the realm that we can start getting into, and it gets very personal, just like you're talking.
We didn't realize how personal until last night at the dinner table. Like, and it's like, oh my God, I thought we all bought into this. And,
Well, he's not earning the money, so he doesn't have to buy into it quite yet. But he might now understand, because instead of going with the assumption that he understood, now you've explained it to him. And now he goes, oh, I understand now. And maybe when he's older and actually has to make the choices, he will make much better choices of how to use his resources.
So I'm just curious, were the friends responsive?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because every other Friday they go to a faux restaurant, and then they'll do some activity, but they always went to the movie after dinner. Or the other friends do, but they're older and they've got jobs. But now he's kind of taking it to them to say, well, what if we reconsider how we spend our resources? And we can have more fun and make our resources go further.
So Tom, let's make that the last question, because I think we're out of time. Oh, I'm sorry.
I wanted to share something. Even though I came in late, I read what you're saying. There's a brand new book that I just reviewed that came on the bookshelves on April 4th called Code to Joy. It's written by a psychologist, Peter Lambro, and it takes Byron Ginsburg and this exact model, and it is so easy. It's a little 4-step plan that you can do, you know, for yourself, really privately, or you can expand it out and work with your children. It is so easy.
Is it mostly Byron Katie's work?
No, she's in there.
Okay.
And the resources, she's a lot of what's in there. But it's a 4-step process, it's called Code to Joy.
Code to Joy.
Anyway, and just for the record, just reading the book, I lost 5 pounds. It was just so energizing and enlightening. Yeah.
Which of her books?
Peter Lamb.
Last question, Tom.
L-A-M-B-R.
Again, not so much a question, but the power of what you're putting before us, where we bring stuff up where we can see it, there's a wonderful model called Taming Your Gremlins by a guy named Richard Carson. Don't know if you've read that book?
No.
And basically what he says is all that talk that happens, all the information we keep getting that we generate internally, he labels those as coming from the gremlins, and sometimes those are hidden assumptions.
Yeah, yeah.
And he points out that the tool that he's developed is if you simply notice, which is what you were talking about, this is off work, of noticing the gremlin, not dealing with it, not fighting it, but just noticing it, they hate that.
It's transformative.
And they shut up, and they go away. And then what you're left with when something comes into view is what you've given here a chance, is to recognize that we're at a moment of choice. And so often we don't know that. And so we get driven by these hidden things. But if we have just that split second to remember, I've got a choice here, because I can see this now. It's huge, even if you make the wrong choice, doesn't matter. Because it shifts, it moves in ways that are...
And the irony
miraculous.
is, this is our tradition. I mean, the spiritual, religious traditions used to do this. This was what their work was, and now we're having to remember it.
Yeah.
Sounds like boundary training we had this morning.
A little different.
The noticing.
Yes, oh yeah.
The being
Noticing
awareness
shifts,
of the
that
choices
It's
and
amazing.
and
it shifts it up.
and the big assumptions that perhaps
Yes.
of who's got power and who doesn't, and
I was thinking that this morning. We could use this process in boundary training.
yes, that might make it very interesting.
Yeah. So I'm going to let you go. If
We have 10 more minutes.
oh, we do.
Yeah, we have at least.
Oh,
10
cool.
till?
3:50. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
And last
What's the
one,
name
when
of the
we
book
get-
you just said?
I'm
This
sorry.
gentleman over here.
Tom?
Taming Your Gremlin. It's transformative. I've used it with a large number of my clients, and it shifts the world. It's
Who's
amazing.
the author?
Richard Carson.
Okay, thanks.
The original copy of it was, I think it was 113 pages, fairly big print, about a third of it was cartoons. Great book.
Yeah.
Well, I was noticing, that the focus is all on looking at the big assumptions behind what's getting in the way of what he's of making changes. Getting in the way of this goal over here that he says he has. But it seems to me like there is not, and maybe there's some part of it later, that builds a positive assumption around what he wants to do.
So
That really, there was not any focus in this on the value of what he wants to do.
right. So part of the reason for that comes out of the research, Keegan and Lake. And one of the things you notice is that most of us will decide to make changes. We make a New Year's resolution, whatever it is. We put up affirmations on the refrigerator. How many of you keep? There's an extraordinary statistic. Out of 7 individuals who have been told by their doctor that they have heart problems, and that if they don't change their lifestyle immediately, they will die within the next 2 years. Out of 7 people who are told that directly by the doctor, how many do you think actually make the changes?
2. 1.
Not quite 1.
I did.
Not quite 1. You're the exception then, okay? So even when we're told it's a life and death situation that we have to make changes with, or even to take a pill every day to save our lives, most people won't do that. So, one of the reasons I like this so much is I've never been successful with willpower. It just doesn't work.
I'm not thinking about it so much in the way of willpower as finding a way to recognize and honor what it is he wants on the other side of that. He has said, I'm sorry, George, I keep saying he, but George has said that he wants to do less work. He wants to work fewer hours. Okay. What he wants to do with that fewer hours, or with that, the more hours he has on something else. That that creates a different assumption that reinforces for him what working fewer hours really means.
And what I'm suggesting is, that's good to do, but typically it doesn't bring forth the kind of change we're looking for. That's just a research piece. You know,
So basically what you're saying then is that working fewer hours and whatever comes out of that for him is a watershed of this other process,
Right.
of this process. It's actually just a watershed of that.
I may decide to work fewer hours and say, okay, there's the benefits, I understand why I should do this, there's a good reason for this to do this, but after a fairly short amount of time, I find myself moving back, working more hours. That there's going to be this draw until I deal with this big piece back over here. And until I deal with that, it's always going to be pulling me back. So yes.
What is your doctor supposed to do? If your doctor said you need to work fewer hours because of your heart, what does he need to know about this? That there's an assumption somewhere? And
Well, I mean, the doctor can tell you need to work fewer hours or you will die, and then it's pretty much up to you. I mean, your therapist might be able to help you.
Your statistics are horrid.
They are. They are horrible. Even with, I mean, the other one that I found even more startling was that someone has to take a pill. They've been told that they have to take a pill to keep themselves alive and healthy. Now, if they take this pill, they will stay alive and healthy. And the situation is that it's fully paid for by insurance. There are no side effects. It's one time a day. It's as easy as possible. And less than 10%, no, less than 20% of the folks who have such a prescription will actually stay on the pill. Close to 80% will stop taking the pill. And you ask them why. You get to it and you ask them why, and you say, well, you know, when I take a pill, I start to see myself as some old guy who's deteriorating, and there's this whole big assumption about who I am when I have to take this pill every day, and I don't like that me. And so I don't take the pill, even though it means my life will be shortened by many years.
Well, if you're an old guy and you're taking the pill to hang in there, you're welcome.
That's right.
I take those pills every morning, and that thought goes through my mind, and I take them anyway.
Right.
I feel like an old person.
Yep.
As I take those.
Well, and I mean, you probably have better management, or the big assumption isn't quite as strong as someone who couldn't do that. I don't know what that might be.
I would say the assumption. I mean, I have that exact thought, but I take them anyway.
Right.
I mean.
Well.
But a lot of people don't.
Isn't the assumption of the youthful that they're going to live forever? And maybe we bring that forward, and that's a kind of denial then.
Right.
Well, and sometimes we have even bigger assumptions, like I have to take my medication in the morning, and I feel like, oh, geez, what's wrong with me? And then I think, if I don't take this, I can't take care of my kids. And my kids absolutely need me. And I know every mom thinks that, but I have special needs kids. They absolutely need me. And so anything that I get, my assumptions get thrown out the window by that assumption. So.
But you're still pointing to that. There's this struggle. There's that interior.
I just want to add a layer to the assumptions as I mean, because it just seems to me as I see all these pills advertised on TV, there's also this assumption that this is in fact the route to healing and the path to take. And I would just go a layer below that and say, you know, it's not about whether or not to take this pill. Is the pill approach even the right one? Because that ties in with this whole resource money economy. And so anyway, I just had to throw that in.
And your point, I think your example points to the importance of this work, and my belief, at least, the importance of doing the work in churches, because you're pointing to the kind of work that needs to be done, the scope of it, and I don't know another institution where the work could get done. I mean, and tell me if I'm wrong, I keep trying to come up with another institution, but I don't know another place that could actually take this on except churches. And so,
just to continue too, in terms of like justice work, and you know, I think it's nice to see the assumptions changing about, okay, we are a privileged country and we want to help those who are less privileged. Let's go in and build things for them, you know, and that is starting to change, and recognizing that that is in fact, you know, we're just sort of carrying our hubris into other countries and saying,
yes.
oh, we know how to do it for you, instead of honoring the culture and traditions that are and the resources that are there, and you know, and helping empower the people. So the same kinds of, so yeah, this model is good for that.
Tom?
Just two things. You're knocking on a door that's very personal for me. This whole awareness of knowing what's going on and seeing it. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with esophageal cancer and went through chemo, radiation, radical, brutal surgery. And since then, I've been running clear on my CAT scans, except that I've had this mounting inexorable pain. 10 days ago, we found out that they blew right through the CAT scans, and our cancer is back. And so on Monday, I'm going back into chemo and radiation. The reason I'm raising this is that what I've discovered about, you know, taking the pills or being old or looking in the mirror or, you know, making adjustments with fewer work hours is that this is not novel, but I've been riding a roller coaster is the way that I see it. And sometimes it goes up very high and sometimes it dips down very deep. And sometimes it flips on its sides, whips you upside down and leaves you there for a week at a time. You go in for a routine visit at 8:30 in the morning, you come out of the hospital 11:30 that night. And the thing that's so special about this is learning that they make you ride the roller coaster blindfolded. You can't see anything that's coming. And what that does, Tom, is incredible in terms of making you present with what's going on right now in the stretch you're in. Because you got one choice you can make at that point, is do whatever is needed to stay on the roller coaster, or, and this is a legitimate, I mean, a true choice that you think about, get off the roller coaster. And you get off, you know, you can kill yourself. I mean, you can remove yourself. But what you're talking about is so vital in terms of living and being present with all that is here and now. And being alive is really, really cool. It really is.
It is.
And to be able to be with it and in it without a fight, without a struggle, but to be fully participatory in our own life as this moves, you know, I wish you all could do that. I mean, it's an amazing thing. Second point I want to make very quickly is that I'm a member of Plymouth Church. And I haven't been able to work very much. The bills have been staggering. And Plymouth is not an overstatement. This is not a figure of speech. The community, you talked about the support and the sustainability of the place that can hold people safely, has kept me alive.
I echo
Churches
that.
are
They
special.
did it for me too. Ra, Plymouth did it for me too. An amazing model for how to do that.
We have that culture built in, and we can take it deeper. I mean, you know, this is what we can do as churches. And I really appreciate you sharing that personal stuff. And what do I want to say? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could help one another go to the space that you've been drugged to kicking and screaming? Or maybe not kicking and screaming, but you've been drugged into that place of having to pay attention. Wouldn't it be nice if we could help one another get there a little less painfully?
Well, the reason I raise this is that what you're talking about is one of the models.
Yes, it is.
Where that can happen.
Yes.
My professional work, I'm an executive and corporate coach. I've been doing it for 20 years. In terms of the coaching profession itself, I'm positively ancient. I mean, I started doing it before all this was there. And the ability to be with what truly is a skill. And it's not one that any of us very good at, for the most part. And what you're doing is sharing with us, you know, one of the routes, one of the pathways that can take us, you know, into that ability to be with ourselves, to be fully alive in our own life. And I'm going to do that. It's really cool.
And I'm inviting churches to say, this is something that we need to do together, and our world is begging for it. And it may not know that we're the best ones to do it, but I'm suggesting we're the best ones out there to do it.
Well, and the church surprises itself. Plymouth has been very surprised by its response to me. I'll cut that short. As a result of my experience, there's been a whole lot of caring and love that has happened at such a level that the individuals caught up in that are really quite surprised and realize this is what we should be doing as a church. And so one of the outgrowths, which I just love, is they have now institutionalized the kind of support loop that they sort of built in an ad hoc manner around me, in order that any member that has any kind of need of this type, there's now a formal mechanism in place passed by the church council, all that kind of stuff, to try to be aware of that stuff and to bring the resource that is needed. And it's really cool. And the churches, you know, institutionally and individually, there's a whole lot of people who have been very surprised by what this has brought up in them and for them. And we're all really kind of grateful. It's cool.
I also think it's important as we think about the UCC.
Can't hear you.
Speak up.
Oh, sorry. I think as UCC and Covenant, this is very important because we make assumptions when we disagree with each other. You know, that's a place to where assumptions can really come in. One of church is open and affirming, another church isn't. And we make assumptions as to why. And I think that this is a good practice. As we start doing that, we may be able to understand and deal with our fundamental belief, which is that we can all participate with our differences. So I think this is also important in that.
Yeah, we could inquire into those.
Exactly.
I'm sensing that there are people who would like to take up your point of meeting in the free time.
Sure.
But I would suggest rather than just doing it at meeting people at the door, that you get a space and announce it when it will be.
You know, I asked Jane, and her suggestion was that we actually meet by the door and then come and find a space. So I kind of agree with you.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll explore that. Okay, let's call it quits. I left some my cards there by the water. They're pretty funky cards, they're like hand printed, but if you want to get more information, be in touch with me.
What I found fascinating in civil service